It is May of 334 BC. The Granicus River flows fiercely, its cold, dark waters reflecting the clear spring sky. On the western bank, the young King Alexander of Macedonia lifts his head, the wind rustling the plumes of his helmet. He is just 22 years old, but his eyes burn with the intensity of a leader born to change the world. On the opposite side of the river, the Persian forces stand in formation, thousands of cavalry and mercenary soldiers, confident that the current will serve as a deadly barrier. The tension in the air is palpable. With a battle cry, Alexander mounts Bucephalus and positions himself at the head of his men. The attack that is about to begin will decide whether his dream of conquering the East becomes reality or ends here, drowned in the treacherous waters of the Granicus. The sound of Macedonian trumpets echoes across the valley, and the fate of empires hangs in the balance. This is the Battle of the Granicus River, the first great test of Alexander the Great, a battle that will either open the way for a legendary campaign or end his empire before it even begins. At the dawn of spring in 334 BC, the young king of Macedonia, Alexander, crossed the narrow waters of the Hellespont with an eager but resolute army. At just 22 years old, he bore the weight of an empire on his shoulders and harbored a burning dream to overthrow the Persian giant. The crossing was not merely a geographic matter, it was a symbolic act. Alexander's army entered Asia as conquerors, marking the beginning of a campaign that would alter the course of history. The Persian Empire, under the rule of Darius III, was not an enemy to be underestimated. For decades, it had imposed its hegemony over vast territories, from Babylon to the city-states of Asia Minor. But Alexander was more than an impulsive warrior. He had studied under Aristotle, grasped the virtues of strategy, and inherited the vision of his father, Philip II. The king of the Macedonians knew that victory at the Granicus River was crucial to pave the way for future conquests. As Alexander crossed the Hellespont, ancient legends came to his mind. It is said he visited the mythical Troy, paying homage to Achilles, his ancestral hero, whose feats in battle he sought to emulate. The choice to cross the strait with great pomp served not only to inspire his men, but also to send a clear message to the Persian world. Macedonia had come to conquer, not to be subdued. The wind blew over the waters, carrying with it the murmurs of waves and the scent of unknown lands. As he set foot on the Asian shore, Alexander felt the magnitude of his mission. He was not merely marching toward an enemy, he was taking the first step to challenge the greatest empire the world had ever known. The dust stirred by his soldiers' boots mixed with the palpable tension in the air, while the Persians began mobilizing their forces. That same day, the Persian satraps of the region gathered for a war council. Spithridates, the Persian cavalry commander, was a shrewd and determined warrior. Beside him, Arsaces, the governor of Phrygia, pondered their options. Alexander's arrival in Asia was not unexpected, but the audacity of the young king crossing the strait with such confidence made it clear he did not fear the consequences of his actions. "He challenges the empire as if he has already won," Arsaces remarked, with a mixture of disbelief and concern. Meanwhile, in the Macedonian camp, the atmosphere was a blend of nervousness and anticipation. Parmenion, one of Alexander's most seasoned and trusted generals, was a man of prudence. He knew that crossing the Granicus River would present a formidable challenge. The river was treacherous with swift currents and slippery banks. A rash attack could easily play into a Persian trap. "We must wait for the right moment," Parmenion advised, his voice grave but calm. "Patience may save us." But Alexander held a different vision. He was a strategist who understood the value of speed and surprise. "Fortune favors the bold," he responded, his eyes alight with a determination that seemed to defy even the gods. Hesitation was a luxury he could not afford. "We will attack at dawn," he declared. His men felt the energy emanating from their leader, a confidence that seemed to instill courage even in the most uncertain hearts. The night before the battle brought a heavy silence to the camp. Campfires flickered, casting restless shadows over the anxious expressions of the soldiers. Men adjusted their armor and tested the heft of their weapons. Each knew that the coming day would bring a trial by fire, a confrontation that would seal the fate of many. But amidst the anxiety, Alexander walked among them, offering words of encouragement and exuding a calm that was almost supernatural. "Remember what we came here for," he said. "It is not just glory, it is our history, the greatness we promised to our people." His soldiers looked at him with reverence, as if, through his mere presence, he could dispel the fear that loomed over them. The wind continued to blow, and owls screeched in the distance, as if nature itself were aware of the impending battle. The day dawned with a clear sky, but the air was heavy with an almost tangible tension as the armies prepared for battle. On the Persian side of the Granicus River, the forces were well positioned, confident that the unfavorable terrain would discourage any attempt to cross. The current was strong, the riverbed treacherous, and the steep banks served as a natural barrier. A solid defense seemed to ensure the safety of the Persians. Spithridates and Arsites, the Persian commanders, surveyed the battlefield. Spithridates, a seasoned cavalry leader, believed that the best defense would be a swift counterattack, while Arsites favored a more defensive approach. The division of opinions among the leaders reflected the lack of unity that weakened the Persian army. "Our position is strong," Arsites insisted. "If we wait, they will make a mistake." Spithridates, however, frowned in dissatisfaction. "You underestimate the enemy. Alexander is young, but he is not naive. He has already shown he prefers to strike quickly before we can organize a stronger defense." There was truth in his words. But time to make decisions was running out. On the Macedonian side, Alexander convened his war council. As always, Parmenion advocated caution. "A frontal attack here could cost us dearly," he said. "The Persians have the advantage of the terrain, and our men will have to fight against the current before they can even wield their weapons." His words echoed common sense, but the room was thick with restless energy. Everyone knew that Alexander had his own vision. The young king listened intently, but his gaze did not waver. He stood, his armor gleaming in the dim morning light. "Parmenion, you are right," he began. "But hesitating here would be the greatest mistake of all. We must act decisively and catch our enemies by surprise. They expect us to be careful. Therefore, we will not be." A flame of audacity danced in his eyes. The decision was made. They would attack without delay. As orders were distributed, the Macedonian army prepared with military precision. Alexander knew that victory would not come from brute force, but from tactics. He planned a multi-front assault. First, the light cavalry under Amyntas would charge into the river, probing the Persian defenses and distracting their forces. Then, Alexander himself would lead the companion cavalry, his elite horsemen, in a decisive charge, aiming to break the Persian line at its weakest point. The sounds of battle preparations filled the air. Soldiers sharpened their spears and whispered prayers to the gods. The tension was almost suffocating, but Alexander's presence inspired unshakable faith. He walked among his men, delivering brief but powerful speeches. "Today," he declared, "we will show that Macedonia fears neither rivers nor empires." Each word struck a blow to uncertainty, each gesture a promise of glory. Meanwhile, the Persians continued their own preparations. Hardened Greek mercenaries, veterans of countless wars, stood alongside Persian soldiers, forming a wall of spears and shields. Spithridates' forces were ready to intercept any advance, and Arsites maintained his belief that the terrain advantage would secure their victory. "They will have to climb the banks under our attack," he reminded his men, trying to bolster their morale. The Macedonians cannot cross without becoming disorganized. What the Persians had yet to fully grasp was Alexander's indomitable spirit. To him, the battle was a game of precision, nerves, and leadership, and he was about to show that boldness and strategy, when combined, could change the course of events. The battlefield, still shrouded in an unsettling calm, seemed to hold its breath in anticipation. A brutal confrontation loomed, and the men's hearts beat like war drums. Amid the uncertainty, one truth stood out. The fate of empires would be decided that day, and the Granicus River would forever remember the boldness of a young king seeking eternity. The sun rose high in the sky, casting its rays over the churning waters of the Granicus River. The soldiers' armor glinted under the intense light, and the current whispered ominously of the danger ahead. Alexander sat astride his famous horse, Bucephalus, every fiber of his being ready for battle. The moment of truth had arrived. At Alexander's signal, the light cavalry led by Amyntas began their charge. Men and horses plunged into the waters of the Granicus with force, creating a torrent of noise and energy. They advanced with their spears raised, struggling against the treacherous current. The Persians watched from their positions on the opposite bank, their eyes a mix of surprise and anticipation. For a moment, the assault seemed to falter. The strength of the river threatened to break the Macedonian ranks. It was then that the Persians struck. Under Spithridates' command, the Persian cavalry charged with fury, their spears slicing through the air with deadly precision. Men and horses fell into the blood-streaked waters, and the clash of the two forces was deafening. Chaos reigned as soldiers were thrown down, horses neighed in panic, and the muddy ground was soaked with blood. From a safer vantage point, Parmenion cursed silently. What he had feared was coming true. The battle appeared to be tipping in favor of the Persians. But Alexander did not hesitate. With a firm command, he led the companion cavalry, his elite horsemen, charging down the hill like a storm. The plumes on his helmet, gleaming like flames, were a beacon of hope for his men and a blatant challenge to the Persians. Alexander plunged into the waters with fierce determination, his eyes fixed on the enemy line. He knew he had to change the tide of battle with a decisive strike. Alexander's cavalry collided with the Persian forces with devastating force. Bucephalus charged forward as if blessed by the gods, and Alexander's sword flashed as he cut down his enemies. His presence was magnetic. He was not merely a commander giving orders from a distance, but a warrior on the front lines. His men followed him with near fanatical loyalty, inspired by his bravery. Spithridates, recognizing the danger Alexander posed, sought to confront him directly. He maneuvered his horse skillfully through the chaos of battle, his eyes locked on a single target, the Macedonian king himself. When their gazes met, the battlefield seemed to narrow and time slowed for an instant. The Persian leader attacked with precise skill, his sword slicing through the air toward Alexander. Alexander parried the blow, but the impact was powerful. Spithridates was a formidable opponent, and for a brief moment, the situation seemed dire. Alexander fought with every ounce of his strength, but he knew he was in danger. At that critical moment, Clitus the Black, one of his most loyal generals, intervened. With a well-aimed strike, he cut down Spithridates, saving Alexander's life and turning the tide of the battle. The metallic sound of the Persian sword falling to the ground echoed amid the chaos, bringing a moment of relief. The morale of the Persians began to crumble. The fall of their leader left a void in the enemy ranks. Alexander wasted no time. With a commanding voice, he urged his men to keep pressing forward. "Do not stop," he shouted, his voice cutting through the noise of battle. "For Macedonia!" The cry of the cavalry resounded, and the Persian line began to buckle. As the Macedonian charge gained momentum, the Persian forces fell into disarray. The Greek mercenaries fighting for the Persian Empire battled with courage, but they were being pressed from all sides. The wall of spears they had formed now appeared vulnerable. The battlefield became a scene of utter confusion. Soldiers fought desperately for their lives, horses trampled men at random, and the waters of the Granicus were littered with debris and bodies. Alexander, a leader seemingly born for war, maneuvered his forces with incredible precision. He knew that every moment counted. The riverbanks, which had been a fortress for the Persians at the start of the battle, now turned into a trap for the retreating forces. The Persians, disorganized and without leadership, began to flee. Alexander's courage and Clytus's sacrifice had transformed an uncertain struggle into a triumph. As the dust of battle began to settle and the cries of combat grew fainter, Alexander gathered his men. He looked at them, battered and dust-covered, but with eyes full of pride. "You fought like lions," he declared, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. The Granicus River, which had once seemed an insurmountable obstacle, now bore witness to his first great victory in Asia. The young king knew that this was only the beginning. New challenges awaited, and the Persian Empire had yet to reveal its full strength. But for now, Alexander took a deep breath, savoring the taste of glory and the burden of responsibility in equal measure. Destiny was in his hands, and he had no intention of letting it slip away. The battlefield had transformed into a whirlwind of dust, blood, and glinting steel. What had begun as a perilous charge against a well-positioned enemy had become a fierce struggle for supremacy. The Macedonian troops, galvanized by Alexander's leadership, pressed relentlessly against the crumbling Persian lines. The clash of swords, the terrified neighing of panicked horses, and the desperate cries of the wounded echoed all around. Alexander, his armor now marked with the scars of battle, commanded the field with lethal precision. He was the eye of the storm, moving with the power and grace of a warrior seemingly born for combat. His presence was not just inspiring, it was decisive. The young king led not from behind but from the front, cutting through his enemies with a skill that seemed almost divine. The Persians, meanwhile, were in disarray. The fall of Spithridates had shattered their resolve, and Arcite's faltering leadership failed to restore order. The governor of Phrygia looked around with growing despair. Hours earlier, his men had been so confident of victory. Now they were retreating, driven back by the unstoppable force of the Macedonians. Arcite knew the day was lost, but his pride and sense of duty kept him from fleeing. In this critical moment, Alexander demonstrated his mastery as a strategist once again. He did not let the newfound advantage lead him to recklessness. Instead, he called his infantry phalanx forward to consolidate the front line. The sarissas, long Macedonian spears, formed an impenetrable wall of sharp points. Moving like a well-oiled machine, the phalanx advanced with deadly precision, forcing the Persians into a disorderly retreat. As the Persians struggled to regroup, the Greek mercenaries fighting on their side made a desperate last stand. These men, hardened by countless battles, formed a compact wall of shields and spears. The ground trembled under the weight of the struggle, but the mercenary line held firm with fierce determination. They knew that surrender was not an option. They had to fight to the bitter end. Alexander saw the danger posed by this final pocket of resistance. He knew that a prolonged fight against these seasoned warriors could delay his victory and cost many lives. But instead of launching a blind assault, the young king executed a clever maneuver. He ordered his cavalry to launch swift, aggressive strikes to keep the mercenaries pinned down. Meanwhile, his phalanx moved to encircle them, closing in with a deadly pincer movement. The attack was carried out with ruthless efficiency. The cavalry, led by Amyntas and other trusted commanders, struck the mercenaries' flanks, while the phalanx advanced from the front, spears bristling. The Greek mercenaries fought with every ounce of strength, but they were surrounded and had no escape. They battled to the last man, displaying incredible bravery, but Alexander's superior tactics prevailed. The battlefield now belonged to the Macedonians. Across the river, Arsites watched the destruction of his army with a crushing sense of defeat. The Granicus, once thought to be a natural ally, had become a graveyard of hopes. Overwhelmed by dishonor and the weight of the loss, the governor fled, unable to salvage the disaster. The Persian forces, demoralized and leaderless, disintegrated into a chaotic retreat, abandoning weapons and even their fallen comrades. As the dust began to settle and the echoes of battle faded, the field grew silent. It was a haunting stillness, broken only by the groans of the wounded and the soft murmur of the river, now tinged red with blood. Alexander removed his helmet and surveyed the scene around him. He knew he had won more than a military victory. He had etched his name among the great. Yet as any seasoned warrior understands, every triumph comes at a price. The young king wasted no time in honoring his fallen and wounded soldiers. He ordered funerary rites to be conducted with the utmost solemnity as his men gathered the bodies of their fallen comrades. There was a heaviness in his gaze, an acknowledgement that glory is never without sacrifice. He offered thanks to the gods for the victory, but the shadow of responsibility remained ever present. Despite the success, Alexander understood that this battle was only the beginning. The gates of Asia Minor were now open, but new challenges awaited. The Persian Empire was still vast, and Darius III, the great king, would surely take steps to counter the growing threat. For now, however, Alexander allowed his men a brief moment of celebration. They had made history, and the future promised even greater conquests. With the sun setting over the Granicus, the young king looked to the horizon. He saw not just the next objective, but an empire waiting to be claimed. Determination burned in his eyes, an unquenchable flame that promised this was only the first of many victories that the world would never forget. The Battle of the Granicus River had ended, and the news of Alexander's victory spread rapidly across Asia Minor. Messengers raced along dusty roads and through distant villages, carrying the tale of how the young Macedonian king had faced the mighty Persian Empire and emerged triumphant. The conquest was not just a military achievement, but also a psychological blow. The empire of Darius III, once seen as invincible, now had its vulnerabilities laid bare. To the Greek cities of Asia Minor, which had suffered under Persian rule for years, Alexander was not just a conqueror, he was a liberator. The first cities to hear of his victory received him with reverence. Alexander understood that brute force alone would not sustain his campaign. He needed to win hearts and minds. He presented himself as a defender of Greek freedom, restoring self-governance and offering protection to cities that pledged their allegiance. In Ephesus, for example, where the Persians had suppressed the worship of the old Greek gods, Alexander ordered the restoration of temples and the honoring of the deities. It was a politically astute move, earning him the support of religious leaders and common citizens alike. "I am the bearer of freedom," he proclaimed, "and the restorer of the glories Asia Minor once knew under the Greeks." The people cheered him, and news of his benevolence soon encouraged other cities to surrender without resistance. Yet, Alexander was not just a diplomat. He knew that despite the victory at the Granicus, the war against the Persian Empire was far from over. Darius III, the great king, had already been informed of the disaster, and the gears of the vast Persian war machine began to turn. The empire's resources were immense, and the Battle of the Granicus had not crippled its capacity to retaliate. Alexander had to be ready. Within his own ranks, morale was high, but the loss of valued comrades weighed heavily on everyone. Alexander gathered his officers and soldiers to honor the fallen. Known for his valor, he also showed deep respect for his men. He arranged for funeral ceremonies to be conducted with great solemnity, placing wreaths on the graves of warriors who had given their lives for Macedonia. "They will live forever in our memory," he declared, his voice thick with emotion. This combination of charismatic leadership and genuine respect for his soldiers further strengthened the loyalty within his army. Parmenion, who had once questioned the risks of battle, now watched Alexander with newfound admiration. "He is not just a king," the veteran general remarked to his fellow officers. "He is a true leader, worthy of being followed to the ends of the earth." This sentiment was shared by the rank and file, who saw Alexander not only as a commander, but as a symbol of their own glorious destiny. The victory also had important strategic implications. With Asia Minor now open, Alexander planned to advance inland, where Persian fortresses still awaited. He reorganized his forces, ensuring that every unit was prepared for the upcoming challenges. Supplies were distributed and alliances were reinforced. Alexander knew that he had to maintain the momentum of his campaign, for any pause could give Darius the opportunity to regroup. In the palace of Darius III, the impact of the defeat at the Granicus was profound. The great king, who had previously dismissed Alexander as a minor nuisance, now realized the gravity of the threat. Darius began to assemble a colossal army, one that would put the young Macedonian king to the ultimate test. But a seed of fear had already been planted, and Darius himself knew that Alexander was no ordinary adversary. He was a conqueror of unparalleled skill, and his audacity challenged the very foundations of the Persian Empire's sense of security. Meanwhile, Alexander gazed at the horizon with a mixture of satisfaction and ambition. Each city liberated, each enemy defeated, was another step toward his dream, a world unified under his banner. He knew the future held even more deadly challenges, but his determination remained unshakable. Every victory was a reminder that he was on the right path, that his legend was being written in blood and glory. As the Macedonian army marched deeper into Asia Minor, Alexander's name resounded across the region, echoing with the promise of new battles and new triumphs. Yet, deep down, the young king understood that each step brought him closer to an inevitable showdown with Darius, the man who commanded the world's greatest empire. Alexander clenched his fist at the thought, with the spirit of a conqueror who knew his destiny was greater than himself. And so, the campaign continued. The world was about to witness the rise of an empire unlike any seen before, forged through strength, cunning, and the unyielding will of a single man, Alexander the Great.